Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today at this RUSI event on cyber. So this is a discussion today around issues to do with cyber diplomacy, cyber and digital in foreign policy. My name is Conrad Prince. I'm a fellow here at RUSI, amongst other things. I help to lead the RUSI Cyber Policy Research Programme. Prior to that, I spent most of my career in the UK government as the deputy head of GCHQ, the UK's Signals Intelligence and Cybersecurity Agency, for about 8 years. But then more relevantly for today, I was the UK government's first cyber ambassador, a role I held from 2015 to 2018. And I'm delighted today to be joined by three current cyber ambassadors, serving cyber ambassadors from across the EU. So we're joined by Dr. Regina Greenberger, who's Germany's cyber ambassador. I think has been the cyber ambassador there since 2020. We're joined by Tanel Sepp, the ambassador at large for cyber diplomacy in Estonia, who I think started the role at the beginning of this year. And by Nathalie Jasma, the ambassador at large for security policy and cyber in the Netherlands, who I think has held the role for a couple of years. So shortly, I'm going to ask each of the ambassadors to make an opening statement to kick things off. And I think we'll go in the order of Regina, Tanel, and then Nathalie. Then I'm going to ask a few questions to begin the discussion. And then I want to open it out to questions from attendees. So for those of you who are dialing in, please can you put your questions in the Zoom Q&A function, and I will then pull those together and put them to the panel at the appropriate moment. And you can start putting your questions in now, no need to wait until later on in the session. So thank you. Today, really, we want to cover two broad themes, I suppose. First of all, to talk a little bit about the role and function of cyber ambassadors. I mean, when I started as a cyber ambassador, there were very few of us. Now I think there's upwards of 30, possibly more. So really interested to hear insights into that. And then to move on to some of the really challenging cyber policy issues that the ambassadors who have joined us today are wrestling with or engaged with. And I should say that everything in today's event is going to be on the record, so both remarks and Q&A, and we'll aim to finish, or we will finish in an hour's time. So many thanks for joining us. Many thanks to our cyber ambassadors for joining us. It's great to see you here today. And what I'd like to do now is invite each in turn just to introduce themselves and speak for maybe 5 minutes or so, 5 or 7 minutes, with their observations and reflections from their point of view as their nation's cyber ambassador. So with that, if I could start with Regina Greenberger, could you kick us off, please? That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. And hello, everybody. Hello, my colleagues, Nathalie and Tanel. Nice to see you again. Actually, my first remark would be that you will find out that no two cyber ambassadors have exactly the same portfolio. It's really incredible how diverse the interpretations of cyber diplomacy are. And yeah, just to let you know, I'll start with my 5 pillars of cyber diplomacy that I'm following. The first pillar is threat awareness. This is something that is, let's say, prepared by different entities within the government. So we have, of course, the domestic security people and the cybersecurity agency. We have, of course, the military situational awareness, and we have my contribution, which is fed also by the reporting by our embassies, but also by our bilateral consultations, which we have with a number of countries. You know, knowing the threat leads to the next question: what can we do about it? So response, resilience, deterrence, countermeasures, retaliation. That's the next pillar of what I do. And we have, let's say, 3 circles of our, let's say, operational options. One is, of course, we have a national cybersecurity strategy, which describes some of our options. The next one is EU. We have a cyber diplomacy toolbox. That's also something that I'm dealing with. And then, of course, NATO cyber defense, which is also followed up by my team. Talking about NATO, we are already in the military field. So we talk about also military escalation risks. So the third pillar of cyber diplomacy in Germany is confidence building measures. And we have a lot of, let's say, we put a lot of energy into working on confidence building measures in the OSCE context, which is particularly interesting now in the context of the Ukraine war, because it is one of the remaining fora where we actually have Russian representatives sitting and listening to what we have to say. And the experience with the CBMs on the regional level encouraged us also to come up with ideas for CBMs on the global level. We are part of a coalition of confidence builders, as we call them, working title, to set up CBMs in the context of the open-ended working group on cyber norms for states. Now that I've touched upon the United Nations level, I must say that for the decision what is right and what is wrong, what is allowed and what is forbidden in cyberspace, so for governance question, we endorse, of course, the framework of the United Nations and the working groups that we have there, like open-ended working group, and for example, and hopefully in future the program of action. This is the most important building block for what we want to achieve in terms of cyber governance. Then we have, of course, the Council of Europe. We are active in the working group on the Artificial Intelligence Convention. And then there is a smaller coalition of states who are active in protecting freedom online. This is the Freedom Online Coalition, and this is also something where we have some ambition. Now, speaking of norms and application of international law, this depends, of course, also of capacities that states have in order to implement these norms. So capacity building would be the fifth pillar of my portfolio, and in all dimensions. I do capacity building within the Foreign Ministry, for example, by organizing a cybersecurity month to raise awareness for cyber hygiene within the Foreign Ministry, but also together with other ministries to have a more consistent approach to all of our cyber capacity building projects. We are part of EU CyberNet, which is something, an expert network hosted by Estonia. I think Tana will tell more about it. And we are also working with GFCE, something that is hosted in the Netherlands. So I think Natalie will tell more about it. So our idea is to follow up on the one page that is part of the consensus report within the last OEWG consensus reports. There is one page on cyber capacity building, and I see it as my task to implement this one page on cyber capacity building and make it reality. So that's in brief what I actually do, and with this, back to you, Konrad.
Wonderful, thank you very much indeed. That's fascinating. So, Tanel, can I pass to you then and invite you to make some opening comments? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as Regina said, it's good to see my colleagues again. It does happen so that we meet quite often during different formats and different locations all around the globe. But in Estonia, the cyber ambassador position has been filled just some years now, and I am the second volume. We just recently, actually beginning of this year, we kind of readjusted our tasks, And basically how we are approaching it is slightly different of what Regina was describing. In Estonia, here we kind of divide the whole portfolio into two. The first part is about the stability framework, which covers norms and international law, including confidence building measures, awareness raising, internet governance, and new technology. So all kinds of different questions there. And then kind of the seconding block here is about deterrence, how we work with our partners, how we build our partnerships, how we attribute different cyber attacks, how we react to attributions, because attribution itself is just a political statement, and then also how we build up resilience in other countries. So the capacity building part here. So this is kind of what we call this cyber diplomacy motor or engine, how it should work. And I have to say I have learned a couple of ideas for this motor from the UK system, and that also shows how well we're actually working with different partners. We are really borrowing some ideas. But in more general terms, I would say that there's this joke in our community that whenever you start your speech with a "cyber is important" slogan, then everybody kind of smirks a bit, because cyber is important, but especially if politicians talk about cyber is important, then quite often it's difficult for them to give substance or to explain why is it important. So I would say that one of the biggest roles I have is really to translate what happens in the cyber world into language that is understandable on political level or to my leadership, so that they can make their own policy decisions, and at the same time also to kind of join what's happening in the cyber world with activities in so-called real world or kinetic world. That sometimes there are links, sometimes there are no links, but especially we are talking about politically motivated cyber activities, and there you always have to look for the kind of larger framework or larger picture to understand what is happening in the cyberspace. Because even if I talk about attribution, for example, then we're not talking about some small activities, but really, if we want to react, we have to focus on larger attacks, and these are always somehow, at least politically motivated. So we are also quite widespread in our activities. Right now, of course, our focus is very much on Ukraine and what Russia is doing there. We're trying to help and assist our Ukrainian friends as much as possible, because this is clearly a violation of any single norm, be it related to traditional international law or our cyber norms, what we are talking about. So this is our focus right now. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Tunnel. And no doubt we'll come back to that shortly, I think. And Natalie, would you like to say a few words, please, about from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Konrad, and hi to the colleagues and to everybody who is listening, watching this conversation. We in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs started our cyber diplomacy in 2015, and that was shortly after we had our wake-up call in the Netherlands, if you will. And I think a lot of countries have experienced a certain wake-up call. We had a attack on DigiNotar which was a certificate company. And through that, some of the government websites were no longer up and running. And so basically we started our sort of foreign engagement based on those experiences, among others. And we hosted the Global Cyberspace Conference in 2015. And two of the outcomes I would like to mention because they were very relevant for us. One was the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, which was a group of experts, cross-regional, who were coming up with sort of rules of the road in cyberspace and basically inspiring the norms discussion internationally. And the second outcome was that we established with others the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which serves as a hub for capacity building where demand and what's on offer on cyber capacity building can come together. And so we've taken on board a lot of lessons learned on donor coordination and best practices on development aid, basically, but then in the cyberspace. The roughly sort of the work that we do is similar to what Regine and Tanel described. So the way we organize is that our first pillar is the normative framework. So what kind of international rules and norms do we agree to? And then the second pillar is around the question, what do we do if a state doesn't behave according to the rules? So diplomatic response, starting from having an initial démarche, talking to the state where the threat comes from, all the way to deterrence. And then, of course, it can go outside of the cyber area. Then the third pillar is capacity building. And our fourth pillar, internet governance. And the fifth pillar is human rights online. What also my colleagues were referring to is sort of what is it that sort of overarching in our messaging to our political leaders and the way we present cyber diplomacy to the world. I always like to sort of refer to it as a normal area in a way. Like, I mean, it's nothing new in terms of international relations. It's all about influencing behavior of other states and setting norms, holding states accountable, discussing what we find acceptable behavior, what we find not acceptable behavior, and in order to make the world, as we see it, a safer place, so our communities can have a prosperous and open, free and stable and interoperable cyberspace. Let me leave it to that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you all for those introductory remarks. I just want to start putting questions down. And Natalie, perhaps if I can start with aiming this one at you, and then obviously if the others could chip in. So actually, I'm going to start with a question we've already had from a member of the audience, from Vincent Veldsel. And this is about, you know, the nature of what is a cyber ambassador and how does it function within governmental systems, which, you know, so people are quite interested in. Can you just say a little bit more about, I mean, clearly in the physical world, we all understand what ambassadors are, and, you know, they work in overseas countries, they represent your country in the overseas country. I mean, the internet's a bit different from that. So, I mean, what is your role as a cyber ambassador? How does that relate, for example, to, you know, a head of cyber policy within your Ministry of Foreign Affairs or other relevant sort of policymaking departments? What is it about the cyber ambassador that's different? What are you bringing to the table? And I'll start with Natalie and then interested in others' views.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think there we do see different models in different states. I mean, the way we have organized my position is basically that I don't officially lead our cyber department. So my role is really to be the ambassador, sort of the representative to other countries, more and more also to the private sector. So similar to ambassadors who are working abroad, and whereas of course they have a responsibility for a certain country or for a certain organization, multilateral forum, whereas I'm responsible for a certain topic and try to cover everything that relates to that topic. But then of course we have our policymakers, and because I have to travel quite a bit, I can't deal with sort of day-to-day managerial challenges. And of course, when you have to bring things to the attention of your senior leadership and or the minister, then you need to go through the bureaucracy. That takes time, and that is a different different kind of task that you have at hand. So in a way, I have a similar role as an ambassador who is posted abroad. And what is interesting in our case, the first cyber envoy that we had was actually a minister. So it was a former minister who then stayed on and was our cyber envoy. Then for some time, we didn't have a cyber ambassador as such, but then sort of when we grew and sort of the area became more and more important, we said, okay, it's good to have a person at that rank again to be responsible for all that kind of engagement.
Thank you very much. That makes a lot of sense. Regina, any reflections from your point of view as to how it works in Germany, your role with respect to sort of policy departments and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Yeah, in our case, the first working unit dealing with cyber questions was a cyber coordination staff. Coordination in the sense that the staff itself is small, but it works cross-cutting the ministry with all the working units who have anything to do with cyber. So, for example, the NATO desk or the regional desk and so on. So this was the origin, and the cyber staff was formed out of the disarmament people. So that's, I think, also a historic parallel in other ministries, that disarmament and arms control is the birthplace for cyber diplomacy. A cyber ambassador was established only after the Snowden leaks, because then it was clear, okay, we need also, you know, a high-ranking interface to discuss these issues with our partners, and establish somebody who is who has the rank and also perhaps the experience to represent also national positions towards you know, on an international stage. But then the person, Dirk Bengelmann was the first, was still called I think an envoy too, like Nathalie said, an envoy for cyber security and cyber foreign policy. And then when I started my job, I said, okay, we need something that is less, and this is more like a brand of what I'm doing. And I started to call myself an ambassador, because this is easily understood, more easily understood than, you know, the envoy for cybersecurity and cyber foreign policy. So basically, that's a marketing issue to call myself an ambassador, and I think it works really well, because this let's say the idea of having somebody who is representing positions and ideas and also requests on an international stage it's intuitively understood by my counterparts, and that makes it easier for me to communicate what I'm actually doing and what is my aim.
Great, thank you very much. And Tanel, if I could turn to you for some thoughts on this.
Thanks. Well, I'm actually double-hatted. I'm ambassador at large for cyber diplomacy, as well as head of our digital and cyber diplomacy department. So I do have the managerial stuff, things also to manage, and that takes a bit of time. But for us, I think there are two main reasons why we have this kind of position. First, cyber is kind of niche topic for us. So having kind of face for outside world to talk about cyber issues was quite natural for us to have. And second, as there are more and more cyber ambassadors all around the world, it's kind of its own format now. So, and we would not want to be left out of this format at no cost. So, so that's how it works for us, at least. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And I'll come back later on, perhaps, to some more questions about the nature of the cyber ambassador role. But I wanted to move into a sort of policy area now, and perhaps Tanel, I could stick with you. I mean, you mentioned, well, clearly we're going to talk about Russia and Ukraine. I mean, you mentioned the work you're doing with Ukraine, and many partners are doing with Ukraine. You mentioned your role around deterrence and deterrence issues, and I suppose so. In Ukraine, obviously, we have this terrible illegal war, but which has been accompanied by significant, cyber activity by Russia targeting the Ukraine. Some of it not very successful, thankfully, but there's been plenty of it. Where do you feel this leaves the kind of discussions around norms and around deterrence when we have this kind of flagrant, breaching of many of those norms happening in front of us with these, large-scale Russian cyber attacks, Viasat, the many Wiper attacks that they've attempted, and also, operations which I might want to come on to later on by non-state actors as well. But how does that leave you feeling about the norms debate, and also about the effectiveness of deterrence mechanisms, if you sort of take that in two parts, if you like? And then I'd like to invite comments from the others.
I wish I could say that we have good enough norms or good enough accountability systems in place. That is not the case right now, and especially as the aggressor is also a permanent member of the UN Security Council. That creates immediately huge problems, and we see how different developments in UN have played out, be it in terms of resolutions about Russia's aggression. Then the only place where you could do anything is the General Assembly, not the Security Council itself, because Russia keeps vetoing, for obvious reasons, any attempts. So we are in a really difficult situation, and it also goes to confidence building measures. I mean, if we want to ease some tensions and really build at least some kind of trust-like feeling, well, it is completely impossible right now with Russia. So so that creates a lot of issues. But what we are really trying to do right now is, first of all, of course, to assist Ukraine technically as much as possible, so that Ukrainians can resist better and kind of continue building their resilience. And at the same time, we're looking also to different aspects of international law. So accountability is, of course, one of these key words that you can hear in my capital, but really looking also international humanitarian law, because that's right now the case for the first case ever where it was so evident that cyber tools were fully integrated into kinetic warfare. Be it, for example, the KSAT attack that was really to enable military activities on the ground. So this is where we are trying to look into, and also we are kind of touching or scraping a bit right now other aspects of international law and international law institutions, because this is a new field for us, for everybody of us. So so for international humanitarian law, I mean, you mentioned also the non-state actors. Well, that's another field here that is untouched so far. Or how do we interpret humanitarian law, international humanitarian law, so in terms of non-state actors? So we're trying to analyze, work out our own positions, try to find other countries and other entities to see what they're thinking and what they want to get out of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Natalie, thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. Well, obviously, the war is a violation of the UN Charter to begin with. So, and cyber is an element in the war, but it's a kinetic war. So when we go then to the normative framework and relevance in wartime, then indeed, as Tanel said, international humanitarian law becomes most important once we reach that stage of a kinetic war. And I'm really happy to see that a lot of stakeholders are actually gathering evidence to hold Russia accountable, and also in the area of cyber, and that is obviously in this time of social media, everybody having a photo camera at hand, gathering proof is different than, say, 20 years ago. So that is, from a professional point of view, that is interesting. But indeed, IHL is the most important here, and accountability, as Tanel said. You mentioned, Conrad, the role of the private sector. Perhaps to already say something about that, of course, we have seen unprecedented levels of support to Ukraine by the private sector to keep the internet up and running, and that has been really fantastic to see. What we also see is that there are hackers who take a certain side, and that is, of course, a bit more worrying, because it becomes a bit blurry. Where is the role of the state and where is the role of individual citizens? And hacking in the Netherlands is illegal, and I think that goes for a lot of states. And of course, it's different when you're in a war. Then you have different rights. But if you're not, as a country, involved in the war, then of course it is the normal rules that are there. So yeah, hacking is illegal.
Can I just, I mean, that's a really interesting point that you raised that I wanted to move on to, actually, so maybe I'll just go for it now. So I'm interested in just exploring that. So the IT army of Ukraine, interesting kind of, as far as I can tell, it's not an official Ukrainian military organization. It's not officially part of the civilian infrastructure. It's kind of a collective of many, many people, including potentially not only people in Ukraine. It's kind of encouraged by the Ukrainian government. It's carrying out attacks against civilian targets in Russia, including, you know, banks, corporations, DDoS attacks, for example. Now, clearly one has complete sympathy for what they're doing, but I just interested you to say a little bit more about what should the kind of the policy position in the EU or at the UN be? What should our position be in relation to entities, these kind of non-state entities operating out of Ukraine, and what they're doing in relation to the cyber attacks they're launching against, you know, arguably civilian infrastructure in Russia?
I guess the question will be on me. Well, also here, international humanitarian law is what counts. I think we're learning a lot about this war, and so I don't think anybody can be conclusive about this as yet. But of course, also Tana already mentioned sort of the questions around international humanitarian law, like who is sort of a soldier, if you will, if the person is working for this digital army, and who is not, and how then to translate international humanitarian law into this space. That will really be the challenge. But I think, as I said, there are a lot of stakeholders that are gathering evidence for breaches of international humanitarian law, and I think a lot is done in a very neutral way to actually document incidents in both countries. Yeah.
Thank you. Regina, any thoughts on that issue about sort of non-state actors and their implications for the legal and the normative implications of what they might be doing?
Yeah, with Natalie, I'm really warning against these kind of private interference into an armed conflict. I mean, it doesn't happen only on the Ukrainian side, of course. There are also hacktivists that want to contribute to the Russian cause. The problem is also attribution, because if they conduct their activities, for example, from German ground, and their activities are traced back to Germany, how do we kind of distance ourselves from these kind of activities? So I think this is also the place for confidence building measures to make clear that we are not participating when we are not steering these kind of hacktivist activities. Quite the contrary, we are also trying to control would be said too much, but we try to prevent hacktivists from using German infrastructure to conduct such activities. But there is also the problem that national law regards hacks, of course, it's illegal, but the punishment depends on the damage that occurs. So there is if there is, for example, ransom or sabotage activities, there will be the punishment will be set according to the damage that the hacker created. And if it's just a DDoS attack, perhaps even one that hasn't been too successful, then it's basically something that will go unpunished. So I think that's a little bit the problem, that the relevance of these activities within an armed conflict, the relevance which the other side might put for this kind of activity might be much bigger than the actual damage that has occurred. So this is kind of contributing then to an escalation. And another thought is that nobody has control over these hacktivists. The IT army, as you said, there is no regular command and control structure within it. So what happens in the moment when we have ceasefire negotiations or even peace negotiations, and activists are not satisfied with the outcome of these negotiations, how can we stop them from further escalating the conflict? We don't have any means to do this, and this is also something that is very worrying.
Yes, yeah. Tanel, any thoughts from you?
There's one thought that I wanted to add here. That's exactly what I think us, the cyber ambassadors, need to discuss. Because these non-state actors, activist groups, from one side, these are kind of new entities on the field. And at the same time, it's not also very new in terms of, if we think of some other armed conflicts in the history, you always had some other groups somewhere meddling around and that were uncontrollable. But what is different here is that you really have this kind of vast space where these activists are doing what they're doing, and they can be from in so many different countries. They're not geographically kind of confined anywhere. So that's kind of a different thing here. But I do think that this will be not a new normal, but a quite common thing also in the future. And we really need to talk about this and see how we deal and of course what kind of lessons we will learn from the present conflict. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like there's something not new, but there's a shift and there's a movement here that raises some quite interesting questions. I wanted to move on to a different policy topic now. And this is actually a question from Nick Beecroft, one of the audience members. And it's also about kind of the nature of the cyber environment that you're dealing with. And Nick makes the point that arguably a lot of power in cyberspace is not held by governments, but it's held by big tech companies. And obviously one thinks of the obvious American examples, but increasingly in China as well and other parts of the world. As cyber ambassadors, I guess the question is, how do you deal with that? So this is not just conventionally state talking unto another state, but this is, how do you engage with that enormous source of power that is in those tech companies? And maybe can I start with Natalie on that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, the traditional way to deal, I guess, with anything as a government is regulating. So that is, of course, one of the tools that we have at hand. And as we all three are from the EU, we have had different legislation that is rather impactful. Obviously the GDPR, but now also the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act. But apart from that, I mean, really also at the national level, our approach with new legislation is always to reach out to different stakeholders and ask for their opinions. And I think what is really essential is that when you have these big techs working in your sort of social environment, in your with your people, that they need to follow the rules, the values of your society at large. So what we do more and more is engage with the big tech on sort of what are our values and what kind of parts of their business models are perhaps not so compatible with those values. And then obviously the discussion with tech companies from the US is easier, because then we talk about a democracy and similar values. And of course there are different shades of gray, if you will, between sort of Europe and the US, but at large, you see, sorry, I have a lot of noise here, that they do understand what we're saying when we talk about certain values. Obviously, when it's about a growing platform like TikTok, I'm still struggling. How do I engage with them? And I don't know. And so then perhaps legislation is the sort of the more logical way to go.
Interesting, thank you. And Regina, in your role, are you engaging with tech companies? Do you sort of engage with Meta or TikTok, or I mean, how does that work for you in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, this is also specific to cyber in comparison to other, security policy issues, that we have to work with the other stakeholders because the infrastructure is private and it's not state control. So it's built in that we have to work with the tech sector. We have to work with telecom providers, with IT security firms, with software developers, and also with, the industry 4.0 companies to raise their awareness for the risk that they are running by digitization and that they have to invest in cybersecurity. I would like to add one thought, and that is that specifically for us, European cyber ambassadors, we see also that many global South countries expect from Europe to come up with a sustainable approach to how to deal with, basically American big tech. Because there is this idea of neo-colonialism. There is this idea of not wanting to be trapped between, Chinese and Americans. And the question is there an alternative? I wouldn't say a third way, but is there something? We Europeans describe it as digital sovereignty, but some way to protect our own ability to make choices. And this is also something that is very interesting for those who are just starting the way of the digital transformation.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I had a question which I'm interested in all of your views on, but we'll just kick off with Regina and then maybe come to Tanel next. And it's about China essentially. So in the UK, we're giving a lot of thought, I guess, across government and in think tanks and elsewhere as to, China's growing role in technology, the way in which China is, pretty assertively presenting an alternative vision for the future of the internet, and doing that in standards bodies and elsewhere, often at quite a highly developed level of technical detail. It's a vision perceived, by many as being one that is not about democratic values. It's about using the internet as a tool for controlling populations, a tool for exploiting, for essentially as an anti-democratic tool in a way. And at the same time, we know that China is working extensively across the globe, often providing very attractive deals for countries in the developing world around technology. And as you say, Regina, there are countries that they're caught in quite a challenging environment between the West on the one hand and China on the other. And there are many countries who might find China's approach quite attractive in some ways. So, I guess my question, and to ask you first, Regina, and then move on, is what is that a picture that you recognize, I suppose, first? And then if it is, what do you think the democratic world's counter offer to a lot of countries, whether they're in Asia Pacific or in Africa or in the Middle East? What's our counter offer to them, both in terms of technology and values, and how do we promote that? How do we sort of present an alternative to this Chinese vision that's just backed up by practical, cheap technology? What are your thoughts, Regina?
Well, first of all, I would frame it a little bit differently. The Chinese vision is basically a vision of the end of the internet as we know it. It will not be a global internet anymore if states start to control it and and internet is limited then to national jurisdictions. This is not what we know. This is not what we benefited from in the last 30 years. So I think it should be very clear that it's not a different internet. It's not an internet anymore then. What do we have to offer? True ownership of the digital transformation. It is something that I was very, not surprised is not the right word, but I was very touched when I noticed already in the last round of these global norms negotiations in the OEWG that finished in 2021, that the ownership of countries of the global south had increased so much. We had, we started with 15 countries in the GGE back in the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. And then we had like 60 countries in the final round of the OEWG taking the floor and expressing their positions and concerns about the global norms debate. And now when we had the votes on the resolution draft for a resolution setting up a program of action to implement these norms, we had already 157 countries voting yes to this program of action, which shows how many more are now considering or are now convinced that they can also contribute to this global architecture for the internet and for secure cyberspace. And that is something that especially we Europeans with our, with our diversity and our, kind of way of making compromises all over the place, have also been prepared somehow, because we invested a lot of work and energy in promoting the program of action as something that will really help to strengthen ownership and own contributions of countries that are just starting digital transformation, and will help them, to also defend their stance in this development.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Tanya, what are your thoughts on that set of issues?
I want to make three brief points here. First of all, I do agree with Regina here that it's giving the ownership, the possibility for the Global South also to truly take part in this. And in terms of our capacity building projects, what we can really assist them in their digital transition is capacity building on cybersecurity, really focusing that any digital development needs also the security component there. Second, about this internet and China. Well, we've been kind of in the forefront of digitalization and really advocates for open, free, secure internet, because our society, our functioning of the society really depends on it. So it just puts us into clearly into one corner here, and we don't have any other options. But in terms of big tech, I wanted to add one thought here, and I think we are in a kind of changing world, and we also need to kind of change our mindsets as government representatives, because if we look at how much penetrated these big tech companies are in our everyday life, we all use different operational systems. We are using different software, phones, laptops, whatever. Our dependency on this is so high, which is not a bad thing in a way, but the big tech also has a much better threat picture now, and then we the governments have. I mean, we usually dependent on our kind of intelligence services to show where the threats are, but now it's actually the private sector that quite often knows much more about this. So So that also will start shaping our interaction with the private sector in the future. And we are right now at the beginning of this kind of dialogue, this partnership, and this, I think, is one of the most exciting issues right now to discuss.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, certainly in the UK, in our new cyber strategy, we've got this big emphasis on a kind of whole of society response to cyber, about really making those partnerships, that collaboration work, and recognizing that actually government government really doesn't have that many levers. Many of the levers exist out in the private sector, whether it's the tech companies or, elsewhere. Everyone's got a role to play, and that making that come alive, I think, is really important. Thank you. But Natalie, I mean, thoughts on any of that? Thoughts on the sort of China issue, future of the internet, role of the private sector?
Yeah, and I do agree with the threat intel sharing and picture, and we're also doing a lot there and having these initial conversations with the big tech and perhaps some smaller tech. Also because of the regulations in the EU on the NIS2 directive, the responsibilities in sort of what sectors, what entities are supposed to report and fall under the sort of responsibilities of the national search, and so it's going to include a lot of change, and including in the relationship with the big tech on China, but more importantly, I think the global South and what we can offer them. I think indeed it's about ownership, and what we find very important that, of course, as many governments as possible do have a voice in the UN, so that it is true multilateralism when we discuss norms, etc. But also the voice of players in the region need to be heard. And for example, I just came back from South Africa, where we had a regional dialogue with Southern African nations, and where we gathered with government officials, NGOs, private sector, CERT, law enforcement people, and we talked about the cyber challenges in the region. And I felt really, really delighted that I could take part in this conversation, because it brought me a lot of insights, sort of about their challenges and what they want to do, what they need to be doing. And what I really like that we could create is that these countries that are digitalizing now more and more, and that want to reap the benefits of digitalizations, really leapfrog into this world, and that they don't have to make the same kind of mistakes as we have done. I mean, I used to work in the ICT sector, and I find it's really almost shameful that we have to repair the things that we have created in the 90s, say. And so really sort of leapfrogging into the digital age and being able to reap the benefits in a good way is something that I would very much welcome. And the ownership is crucial there. And on the comment made by Regine about sort of the Chinese agenda would really mean the end of the internet. I think I do agree with that, that indeed it is the end. It would mean the internet as we have known it, and sort of the idea around free flow of information, and that innovation and freely thinking would made possible through the internet. And here I also like to sort of include the word reciprocity. I mean, if we as the West are sharing ideas and innovation with the rest of the world, and it's sort of a free flow of information, like as we have known it, how to use the internet, then of course we would like others to contribute to that as well. And that means in the sciences, etc. And if we are to move into a direction that we build dikes, sorry, I'm from the Netherlands, build dikes around all our countries, also in the digital world, then it is indeed the end of the internet as we have known it.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you very much, Natalie. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a very powerful way to end. I mean, a call to arms, if you like, for preserving the immense value that we have in that free, open, peaceful, secure, multi-stakeholder internet that we have and benefit so hugely from. But unfortunately, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but I'm sure you'll agree we've had a really fascinating discussion today. Thank you very much to the three ambassadors who joined us. Regina, thank you, Tanel and Natalie. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts, and it's a great opportunity, great for us to be able to get three such significant ambassadorial figures in the world of cyber on the same call. So that's been great. I'm sure you're on calls with each other all the time, but it's really been great for us here at RUSI. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Do keep your eyes open on the RUSI website for our upcoming events on cyber. And with that, I'll just say thanks again, and we'll draw the session to a close.